Hello, everyone. I'm Shannon Hull, and this is Right in Front of My Face, the podcast talking about big things right in front of us. Welcome to season 3. It feels really good to be back in the podcast studio. I've taken a few months off, but I am back. And before I do anything, I need to thank my sponsors, Tracy Erickson from the Collective Group at Compass and John Gruss from Element Mortgage. It truly is only with their support that I can continue doing this podcast, and I am deeply grateful for your belief in the work that I do. So please, everyone listening, know that these two are the absolute best of the best, and please use them for all of your housing needs. Now, as I said, I've been on a break for a few months, so I would also like to say a huge thank you for your patience. The topics I'm going to cover this season are big. They've taken some time to research, time to process, and all the while I am trying to reenter society through a pandemic. So many of us have so much on our plates, and I'm trying to just keep going, just keep my head in the game. In the last couple months, it's felt like we've gone from 0 to 60 in terms of kids' activities. And so this balancing act has gotten a little tricky for most of us. The first topic of season 3 is going to cover the biggest thing for parents right now, school reopening. In Seattle, our public schools just opened their doors on April 19th. Most are only in a couple hours a day, but the consensus with parents at this point seems to be, well, it's better than nothing. I've been reflecting and wondering a lot about what our kids will be talking about a year from now in terms of what they remember and what has deeply affected them. I feel like there is just absolutely no way that our kids can endure months of solitude, no activities, stressed out parents, and a total life disruption unscathed. But I'm not an expert. Luckily, I know someone who is. Carrie Littlefield Syvertsen is the 2020 National School Social Worker of the Year. She was recognized last March, and her chance to be on a national stage with the leaders of the U.S. government recognizing her and her contributions was canceled. So instead of going to D.C. for her award ceremony, she was quarantined with 2 small children and having to homeschool. Her professional expertise gave me so much insight on what kids are dealing with, especially middle schoolers, and what as parents we can look for as warning signs as our kids reenter school and life. There is nothing more right in front of parents than this transition for our kids, and this episode was meant to help you all better support your children. I'm welcoming to the podcast today Carrie Syvertsen, 2020 National School Social Worker of the Year. I'm also happy to say that she is a friend. She is a wonderful human being. I can attest to that. And Carrie, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and your long list of credentials so I don't screw them up.
Well, thank you, Shannon. You're so great to include me and invite me on your podcast. My name is Carrie Littlefield Syvertsen, and I was honored the 2020 National School Social Worker of the Year. Very humbled by that recognition. I am also the current vice president of the Washington Association for School Social Workers. I'm one of 2 lead school social workers for Seattle Public Schools. I have been a practicing school social worker for the last 15 years. 2 of those years were out of Chicagoland area after my graduate school experience at the University of Chicago. And I've moved out to Washington State back in 2007. Geez, a long time ago.
Flies.
And I worked in the Kent School District for a year. I was at Chief Sealth High School for 9 years in Seattle. I went up to the behavioral health department for a year in their district office when they launched that department back in 2015. And then I had this amazing opportunity to open a brand new middle school, Robert Eaglestaff Middle School, led by Dr. Marnie Campbell. It's now been, this is the end of our 4th year doing that. So I left the district office because I was really excited and energized about the opportunity to be able to open a middle school from the ground up and build the systems. And honestly, it's the entire foundation of the school is anti-racist practices. We are really attempting to be a zero gap middle school where we don't see those discrepancies between our white students and our BIPOC students. And it's an amazing group of people that I work with and a team of professionals that are amazing. I've been a school counselor the last 3 years. I had grade level. I started with my 6th graders. My 8th graders graduated last year. And this year I am funded under Levy grant as a true blue school social worker. And so I have been in the seat of a school counselor, and most of my career has been as a school social worker.
So I want to back up just a little bit and talk about, because I should have probably touched on this in the intro, but I wanted you specifically to come onto this podcast, and I'm super humbled that you said yes. But it is no secret that our kids, and frankly, most adults I know, are amidst a huge mental health crisis with COVID. I am one of the few parents in this country that gets to say that my children have been educated through 2020. My kids go to private school. I sit at such a huge place of privilege, but I know and I recognize that most people are not in this place. Our kids have been out of school. And I think there's been a lot of talk about the education gap that's going to happen. But I watched my own child go back to school in January and like transform into a new child once he went back to third grade. And it really made me reflect pretty deeply on the kids who haven't gone back yet, whose parents are struggling. And, you know, I obviously can't talk about this, but you have been on the front lines of this mental health crisis as a school social worker. And as described to me, your job is to help any situation that impedes learning. Mm-hmm. That is a huge umbrella at this current moment in time. And so I wanted Carrie to come on to kind of educate all of us as parents about what that true impact is on children, because I think a lot of people that listen to this podcast sit from a similar place as me, right? Like we know that there are things going on, but they're not right in front of us in our day to day. I think you see those things, and I'm hoping you can educate us on what the real gaps are, the real impediments to learning. And then more importantly, what we can do to support our children, to support our neighbors through this huge experience of shared trauma that we have all had over 2020. I mean, mental health care professionals are carrying a huge burden right now to get us all through this. But in particular, I am really excited and interested to hear your expertise about how we see kids through this. Mm-hmm. We'll be right back with 2020 National School Social Worker of the Year, Carrie Littlefield Syvertsen.
Hey everybody, John Gruss with Element Mortgage here again, and we're still dealing with a pretty crazy real estate market, especially on the lending side. Interest rates are still incredibly low. So if you have not had an opportunity to refinance your current home yet, what are you waiting for? Rates are great. Reach out to us. We'll be happy to provide you your options. Secondarily, our homes are all increasing in value. Great chance to potentially tap into some of that equity by utilizing a cash out refinance option. Again, the rates are still incredibly low on that, and you've got an opportunity to tap into the equity for either home improvements, maybe some debt consolidation, whatever that additional cash may be beneficial for. Last, if you're buying a home, you've probably seen the news. It's crazy out there. The market is hot. What's going to be incredibly important is that you have a lender that can help you navigate this process by explaining what's going on, how to strategically position your offer so that it's accepted in a market where sellers are getting multiple offers on properties. And at Element Mortgage, we're happy to do that. We're licensed in 49 states. Sorry, New York. Unfortunately, we're not able to assist, but please reach out to me, John, Jon.Gruss, Grus, at elementmortgage.com or 206-954-4787. John Gruss, NMLS number 1108421. Element Mortgage is a division of American Pacific Mortgage, NMLS number 1850, equal housing opportunity.
To start off, can you please talk to me a little bit about the difference between school counselors and social workers?
Sure. Yeah. So school counselors are absolutely instrumental in terms of academic counseling, college and career readiness, and social emotional development. They typically have full grade level, if they're in a middle school or high school, caseloads, so 300, 350, 400 students that they oversee. They help support students in the transition from elementary to middle to high school. And they do a lot of tier 1, meaning universal instruction and design around social, emotional, and college and career readiness. The distinction with school social workers, school counselors have a master's in education degree, okay, and school counselors have a master's in social work degree, which is more clinically trained. We have specific training in mental health expertise in helping to translate for what mental health conditions may look like or show up in a classroom, how to help support teachers, and what scripting we can provide for them to help kids feel more at ease in the classroom, to get into their learning brains, as we might say. We have sort of a systems understanding of how things operate. So many families are connected to multiple systems. So it might be the Child Protective Services or juvenile justice or their own family system. School system is its own system. So we help families navigate all of those different systems. And then we also provide professional case management. So we help kind of navigate and help bring all those key pieces together. And community partnerships are a big part of what we do. Seattle alone we're partnering with the UW Smart Center this fall to bring in what's called trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, TFCBT. And so that's really clinically trained folks within school buildings to provide services to students that may not access outside of their school buildings.
Is that the same type of support you would provide like after a school shooting? Or, that's when I've heard about these trauma workers coming in, is after these huge scenarios, but those are going to come in.
Yeah, so that's really a very specific crisis response. And that's another thing that we're trained in is crisis response. So a death by suicide in a school building or a shooting, you might be the point of contact for sort of organizing all those supports to come in for a very acute situation where there needs to be an immediate response and then tracking and helping formulate the long-term response. When I talk about trauma-informed CBT or trauma-focused CBT, it's more so those students that might be exposed to ongoing trauma in their lives and how that plays out in school. So it might be in the form of behavioral needs or depression, anxiety. And so we are just, we provide that level of service if needed for those students that really need it.
So we're looking at the reentry from COVID from the year of 2020. This next academic year is going to be a year of treating trauma.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So talk to me a little bit about, it's such a big topic. The truth is, I'm not really sure where to start, but our governor specifically sort of issued a proclamation saying that schools have to come back in because we are amidst a public health care crisis, a mental health crisis for our children. Again, I say this from a place of having kids that have been in school. I believe that to be true. And I personally was relieved when that proclamation came back in, knowing that this has implications. So just putting this out into the world, it's not a cut and dry issue, obviously, but for our children, talk to me a little bit about what you are seeing and why our governor calls this a mental health crisis and a public health crisis.
Well, for starters, I'm on this children youth behavioral health work group at the state level, and they unveiled some of the data that's pretty alarming. And the reason why he gave this proclamation was they were saying that, Washington State has, I think, 7.6 million people in it. And they say upwards of 3 to 4 million people will experience some sort of clinically significant behavioral health problem and clinically significant just means that it will interfere with their ability to work, socialize, kind of do their daily living skills. And so that's That's upwards of 44%.
So you're saying half of all people in the state of Washington are experiencing clinical signs of trauma.
That is what they're predicting, that they're seeing the trends kind of play out like that. So within the coming months that we will see that number, that alarming number of people that are, and the most are depression, anxiety, and acute stress. Are the main common symptoms that we'll see, but that's mostly, and the one that they're most concerned with is our children, youth, and young adults are the most alarming in terms of numbers. You know, the Children's Hospital, which is right down
right down the
Children's. You know, in 2019 they had 52 kids admitted for self-harm to their psychiatric unit. In 2020 there were 80 youth. And in 2021 alone, just from January and February, there were 20. So almost half of the total number from 2019, there was 52 that were admitted for self-harm. Just in 2 months, we've already reached half those numbers in 2021 alone. So it's, I think we haven't even reached the surface of what ramifications this will have long term. But I just think that there is an acute problem right now that I think the governor is really trying to pinpoint what the issues are, and opening schools is one of them, to help alleviate some of the environmental concerns, putting kids back in their social environments, and giving families a little bit of breathing room to be able to access other environments than their own homes.
So are you treating kids in the self-harm categories, in eating disorders, and all of these things that I have heard in my own just anecdotal evidence are just skyrocketing? I mean, I have friends that are pediatricians, and they've maintained for a year that the number of just eating disorders in teenage kids has absolutely gone off the charts. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Does that count in the self-harm category, or is that a whole different thing?
Yeah, sure. That is part of it. You know, eating disorders is really under sort of the medical umbrella that is related to mental health, obviously. But the numbers, I think, you know, within a middle school environment, you're going to see different presentation. And I would say, yes, there has been an overall increase in some of the mostly depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation category of issues that may manifest eventually in eating disorders and those other kinds of more specific medical diagnoses. But yeah, it's really sad and alarming. And I think we haven't had direct access to kids aside from a screen without their video cameras on to really assess thoroughly. You know, when we work and live in schools, we see kids and we're able to take in so much information about their presentation, and we're able to assess so much more deeply. And I think that we've been, in a lot of ways, been only going off of parent reporting or students coming out and being brave and talking about their concerns. But I think even these last couple of weeks, just actually physically seeing kids come back into our buildings, we're able to get so much and more information about what they've been dealing with this last year that we've kind of been in the dark about a lot.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about how this reentry has gone for you. You've got 2 weeks in the building, and your zero gap middle school, zero gap goal. How is that going right now?
Well, we're actually only on day, let's see, we're in the second week. So we started last Monday, the 19th. I am simultaneously a parent of two Seattle public schools, boys, 2nd and 5th grade. And so juggling returning to in-building with both my boys that are 3 hours a day from 11:45 to 2:30, which is really helpful when it comes to transportation and childcare outside of those times. And
the mic is dripping with sarcasm, literally dripping with sarcasm.
So I am so thrilled to see these faces in the hallway of my middle schoolers. They are, you know, you can see their smiles through their masks. a lot of them are just awkward and terrified and, but also really excited to be back. And so in a lot of ways, that's why I got into social work, was for that personal human connection. And, the whole idea of like, just that's how I know how to make sense of my role and my identity with kids, is being in person. And so selfishly, it's been really amazing to see how they're doing and what they're reporting and what they're excited about. Secondary in Seattle Public Schools is not a great model yet, because any one given student is only there 2 afternoons a week. So they're there either in cohort A or cohort B, Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday. So it feels a little choppy. I have been really disconcerted by our transportation issues. I think so many kids would have returned in person if transportation was made available. And even our, what we call students who've been living in transition or homeless situations do not have the transportation yet set up from our district to get to and from school. And so there's some serious inequities that are continuing to be revealed. And so that's hard to see. I think a lot of our students, our BIPOC families don't have a choice to come to school based on transportation, based on their being older siblings, caring for their younger siblings, their own health risks within their homes, kind of distrust of systems in general. So distrust of healthcare, distrust of our schools. And so I think that they're not able to access in-person learning how I think we would hope it to. For my own family, I really struggle with that. My kids are desperate to be back in school. They have totally shifted in their presentation the last couple of weeks about their own learning. They're excited to come home and talk about, oh my gosh, I'm doing this thing on the octopus. And my teacher, he did such an amazing job teaching math the first day. I don't know if it was turning out, has some new tricks or what, but it was so awesome. And just how they're glowing and excited and on fire for learning. And then just the simple being able to see kids, even if they're masked and down the hall, to wave and make those community connections, even a pick up and drop off for me. It's just it feels like new beginnings and coming out of our shells.
Well, I think that's the thing, is that, right now it's amazing. And even, I have a daughter that's in kindergarten, and she and her friend, we went to this T-ball event this weekend, and they saw each other from across the field, and they ran, and they have taught them now in kinder that when you see each other, you give yourself a big hug. And so they're squealing and hugging themselves, and they are resilient, but the novelty will wear off, right, at a certain point. Mm-hmm. And then really, what are we looking at in terms of the effects of long-term isolation on kids? And by the way, not only on kids, on teachers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What is that? How does that manifest? What does that look like? Because a part of what I want this conversation to be about is to give us as parents, and any parents that are listening, some tools.
Absolutely.
Right? For our tool belt. So what are the effects of long-term isolation on kids? And I know that's different for every kind of age group, but when we see these things start to manifest, what do we do?
Great questions. Yeah, I think you hit it when you said we adults are struggling with our own long-term isolation and mental health, and are supposed to be sort of the models or understand it better or be able to guide our kids in some miraculous way through really difficult circumstances. All the while we're struggling with it with ourselves. And so
I am in a puddle of guilt about this almost every day, to be honest. I'm short. I do not have a long fuse with my kids. I'm beyond irritated by the simplest things, like my son's newfound habit of whistling through his teeth. It's not okay. But I've lost coping skills.
Oh yeah.
And my kids are in school. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so again, it's you're looking kind of through the looking glass at everybody else. And so I have so much empathy for that. So that's why
No, and I so echo and agree with my own coping. It's like we're fatigued from the coping strategies that used to work. They don't work the same anymore. It's over time, kind of the trauma response, the amount of cortisol in our brains that are pumping, and the fight or flight response, and then the ongoing isolation and constant background buzz of being a parent, of figuring out, what's safe, what's not safe.
It's that for me, and for, I think, so many parents, is the micro decision making every single day.
Absolutely. It's wearing.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast in prep for this interview, and a social worker said, the problem is that the coping mechanisms that I've told my clients to use for a year they're not only not really working anymore, they're bored and they're tired. She's like, they've been in their basements, deep breathing for a year. It's boring and it's not working anymore. And that resonated so deeply.
For sure.
And I think that's the same for our children, who have, we were telling them, like, blow out your birthday candles. That only works for so long.
Exactly. No, it's true. It gets to a point where, and we talk about this with anxiety with kids and humans, that you can use all these coping strategies in the world that you've practiced. And those are really important. Self-care. It's amazing to me how much we're just talking so much more openly about mental health in general and about self-care. And so ongoing self-care is absolutely critically important. But when you talk about anxiety, the biggest thing to do around that, and that's a big presentation, I think, with isolation, is exposure. And so exposure to environments that feel really scary or feel intimidating, as it relates to COVID, or it relates to social. I've noticed I'm a very social person. I absolutely thrive off of people, but I'm noticing my own social anxiety kicking in when I'm surrounded with other people. But my instinct is I want to go home, or I want to retreat, or I don't want to go. And what I'm trying to do is exposure, like a little bit of exposure, a couple friends here, trying it out, seeing how I feel, and then noticing in my body, how was that for me? Noticing that nothing catastrophic happened. We all didn't get COVID, using, of course, the safety measures, whatever it is for you, masking outside. But the biggest thing, I think, that the concern with how it presents for kids in school is that anxiety, that social anxiety piece. And I think one of the hard things is you don't want your kid to suffer, but part of that pushing through the anxiety and experiencing that pain or that discomfort is so critically important in terms of your adaptive skills, and realizing, like, oh, I can do this. I did make it to school today. Nothing catastrophic happened. In fact, here were the positive things that happened. So you have a bigger, more examples in your life of positive experiences that help train your brain to say, like, okay, I'm not going to experience that anxiety response so intensely next time, because I know that I got through it the last time.
That's a super interesting point. And I've noticed this even with my kids. As other families start to get vaccinated, we've been hanging out more, and the kids are not resisting wearing their masks together. Mm-hmm. It's very much a security blanket for them, but it is going to be interesting if the masks ever come off to see how everybody deals with it. But I know that my son, when he went back, it was like we had to have conversations about what that was going to look like and whether or not that was going to be safe. And I really learned that giving him some agency in that process.
Awesome. Yeah.
Helped.
That's great. Well, and you I love that example, just because you providing the space and holding the space for him to be able to process what that was for him. And then you even modeling perhaps how it is for you. I think that's a big tip for parenting, is just like, I'm nervous about X, Y, and Z, and this is why, and not to feed their anxiety, but to sort of validate perhaps their same experience of whatever it is they're facing. And kind of giving them that space to explore how they're feeling about it. all of that, there's so many discomforts with all of this, like day to day. I feel like my kid, I was just holding my kid last night weeping from, who knows what, but just holding them in that space and validating their feelings and their experiences as they're walking this is a novel, this is unprecedented, I always say. But we know human connection and we know human feelings and relationships. And that's the thing we can rely on as parents, is just being there for our kids and hearing them out with what they're going through.
And now a word from some wonderful sponsors. I'm sitting here with Tracy Erickson of the Collective Group at Compass. Tracy, you are a great listing agent. I've seen a lot of homes that are listed by the Collective Group. Can you tell me a little bit about what's in your listing plan and how it sets the Collective Group apart from other agents?
Absolutely. Shannon, there's so much more that goes into selling a home than just putting a sign in the front yard. And we really pride ourselves on that. One of the first things we'll do is walk through the home with the seller and advise on the best improvements. And then once we decide what type of work that we're going to do to give you the best ROI, you can hand those keys over and we will project manage the entire thing. Once we have your home looking its best, we will get it staged from top to bottom and have our amazing photographers come in and not only take photographs, but also do videos, drone shots, and even a Matterport. Once that's completed and we have it on the market, the marketing is huge. So we push social media advertising very hard. Our goal is always to achieve 10,000 views of your property on all social media platforms. So our commitment is always to our sellers in this hot Seattle market to get the highest dollar possible for their biggest investment.
Tracy, where can people find you?
They can find us at compass.com, or they can find us on Instagram, Tracy Erickson Homes, or feel free to give me a call, 206-251-6351.
So Carrie, what for you in this first 2 weeks of going back, what are you looking for in kids in terms of like who's at risk, who's not, who am I gonna, are kids self-reporting things to you and coming to you and saying, I got a big problem? Mm-hmm. Or what are you looking for when you're talking to them?
Well, first of all, I'm looking for any significant changes from what I may have known of them prior. So in their physical presentation, their hygiene, I'm looking for, changes in weight. Some of the red flags that are pretty just in your face of knowing their physical presentation. I'm looking for kids that are presenting with symptoms of depression. They might have low mood. They used to be sort of really interested in hobbies and interests and aren't anymore, or changes in that. I talk to families about struggling to concentrate or remember things, which I think is so common right now, but that's another sort of symptom that we're looking for. Any kind of risky behavior, it's hard. We only been in day 5 or 6. So kids are kind of in their shell right now. I call it sort of the honeymoon phase of starting a school year in general, but they're kind of like waiting to see what this is all about. And they're not really coming out of themselves. So really looking for obviously any specific statements or written things in class around self-harm or feeling anxious, feeling down, feeling hopeless, really relying on our teachers who interface with the kids every day to help report any of those. Even if you don't think it's a big deal, you've got an inkling in your body that this doesn't seem right about this kid. And we really encourage our teaching staff to collaborate with us and let us know what they're seeing, because they have been interfacing with them so much more than I would be.
So the big thing that I just heard from that is any significant change. Like as a parent, we're seeing our kids every day, but maybe re-looking at them from a year ago to now and saying, okay, what's different?
Yeah. And you are truly the expert of your children, right? You know them so much better than an outside professional would. And so, yes, noting any of those significant changes, but you also have to take into consideration that we're sort of all different people from a year ago in a lot of ways. And in some ways we're not at all, but so much environmental change has happened. But taking that into consideration and then just noting anything that sort of sparks your concern or worry. I mean, relying so much on our communities and talking about it with each other about what we're seeing in our kids is so critical because it doesn't make you feel so alone because this can be a really lonely process. But then your school systems and your primary care doctors and the mental health professionals in the community are just such great resources to connect with to say, hey, I'm noticing this about my kid. And the significant changes is the one big red flag for that.
And thinking about the kids going back to school, for parents, we're just like jubilant when they go back, but maybe like rein that in a little bit.
I don't know about that.
Oh,
but
bye.
Yeah, right.
But I do think the self-harm rates and the data that you gave at the top of the podcast are really, really concerning. Mm-hmm. As we're looking at these kids who are alone with screens all the time, mm-hmm. like we're not always sure what they're watching. Mm-hmm. Do you think paying attention to your kids' like browser history and all of that stuff is significant?
Absolutely. All the more right now. I mean, they are living and breathing online. They're getting so much more comfortable, so much more savvy. They're better at tech than we are. So knowing their browser history, putting on the parental controls. And as I say that, I have not done that for my own fifth grader.
But you can take home a list too, Carrie.
But absolutely knowing what their social media interfaces. Yeah, I haven't even ventured there yet with my own child. They're not connected yet to that forum, but middle school is a huge time of kind of coming out about that. But also, there's so many amazing parenting workshops out there and accessing, a lot of schools are sponsoring a lot of things about how to keep your kids safe as it relates to internet safety and in the age of COVID and all of that. And just, of course, reading and making sure you're up to speed on what's out there, what the risks are critically important. So
what is your take on, this is just sort of an off-topic question, but paying attention to other kids' social media? If you're seeing somebody else's kid posting something concerning. I mean, I think this is a time as parents where we kind of need to take that filter off and to say, hey, I saw this, heads up, no judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To the other parent,
yeah.
Is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of our biggest tools is direct communication. And that's where I feel like just knowing your community, building those relationships so that when you do go to that parent about a concern, I mean, wouldn't you want that about your own child if they were posting something like that?
I mean, you would hope so. You would hope so. I want to go back though and touch a little bit on something you said earlier about inequities in school and the BIPOC community and the kids that are in positions of homelessness, not able to get to school. What does that gap look like to you moving forward? It's something we've talked about. It's something I've talked about on the podcast more in reference to educational gap, but there are so many older children that are taking care of younger siblings, so many families that are out of work with adults at home in crisis. How can we support our brethren that are in these horrific positions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's important to note that we kind of be aware of the assumptions we make that online learning for all kids has been horrible or has been a really difficult thing, that many of our kids have reported saying, and many of our BIPOC students in particular have said, actually, this is a safe place that I've been able to learn. My family understands me culturally. My family gets what I'm going through, and I'm able to be in a safe space to learn from my computer. I'm able to make connections with my learning from my teacher to my own personal life and have conversations with my family that are so much deeper and richer. So I think we just have to be mindful that there's been such varying degrees of experiences as it relates to virtual versus coming back into in-person learning. And yeah, what is really hard to sort of wrap my head around is those kids that are stuck at home and want to come back in person, but aren't able to based on the barriers that you just listed. And to me, that's all the more the reason why our systems need to be systematically addressing those barriers. So transportation is a pretty key one, and it's pretty glaring, and it's right there out in front of us. Why aren't we going to pick up kids from their doorstep to make it into in-person learning if that's what their family feels safe about and wants to make happen? So systematically doing a needs assessment and understanding what the needs are out there, and then putting our dollars where they need to be. So mental health professionals, school-based mental health resources are too far and few between, and especially school social workers in Washington. I'll just say, there's about 500 of us practicing in Washington state under many, many different titles. And when I worked in Illinois, it was such a saturated field, and coming out here, it was just a glaring kind of shock that there weren't more school social workers in buildings. But I say all that to say that we as school social workers understand the deep needs of our communities, and many of us are practicing because of social justice. We came into the field because of social justice. And so if we are embedded in our communities, we can better understand the community's needs, and we have those deep relationships that we make with those communities in order to address the issues that come up. And right now there just seems to be such a disconnect between what the needs are and what the resources are. And that's where I feel like, and I'll just do my little plug here, but school social workers are that liaison to make those systematic problems get sort of figured out, but also just on a personal connection part. So much of it is about trust and relationships. And that's where school-based mental health professionals are so key to making that link happen.
Schools serve as a hub for so much of our lives. I think until we've been out of schools, you kind of forget how much you rely on that community and that hub. And school social work seems to be the literal cog that can hold that wheel together as it connects services to families and really can identify impediments to learning, child safety in a way that a teacher can't
and shouldn't. The teachers have so much on their plate, and we need to be providing more of these roles that help address those other underlying conditions so that teachers can partner with us to do what they do best, which is teach, and their craft of helping kids feel safe and supported to learn. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think this has been really illuminating, and I think it gets a little bit overwhelming for me to think about kids coming back in. I'm glad you pointed out, though, that online learning hasn't been a hellscape for every child. I think that is an important thing to keep in mind. But the more that we talk to our kids, the more that we realize that this reentry process is not going to be completely seamless. Mm-hmm. It's confusing. Mm-hmm. It's just multi-layered. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on to say, this is what to look for. This is how you can support kids. I mean, I think it's another constant, gentle reminder to listen to your gut about your child.
Absolutely.
And if you think something is wrong, it might be, or it might not be, but what can you live with at the end of the day?
Absolutely.
And bringing the data is a powerful tool as schools go back in to say, like, maybe we do need to be figuring out how to have a conversation to say yes to this.
Absolutely. Well, and I like what this is going to be messy. This is not going to be a pretty rolled out stage of reopening and going back to our lives. It's multi-layered, like you said. And I mean, I do really think that there's a lot of hope here and a lot of opportunity. I think that, our school systems have been based in racist structures. I think that that COVID and that, George Floyd has really illuminated, and the movement of Black Lives Matter has illuminated so many more inequities as we have known, but they're just so much more in our face, that we have this opportunity to really reimagine education and reimagine how we support kids with their mental health. With this latest Biden's COVID relief bill, American Relief Act, or whatever it's called, there is a lot of dollars out there that school districts are able to apply for to bring in so many more supports in our buildings to help really rebuild our communities and help fortify and help support the resilience that we've already seen in our communities. Their adaptive skills, their amazing ability to rely on each other. Schools have been a central hub and will continue to be, but I do think schools in a lot of ways have been supporting and helping the white and the wealthy, and that we are rethinking and reimagining how that looks for our students who have been underserved. So
I like that the conversation turns child-centric at this point, because, I only know what I see on the news and kind of what I read. But I think one thing that has really affected me during this time is that I don't feel like very much of the conversation has been about what's actually best for our kids, and saying we as adults, we as lawmakers, we as teachers unions,
yep,
as educators, as social workers are going to come together to do the right thing for our kids. Again, it's not coming from a place of blame that I say this. It's from a place of, this is a great opportunity to reframe the conversation on how are we going to do right by these kids who, by the way, have had no choice. There is no consent. There is no vaccine. These kids have done everything we've asked them to do. And the ones that, there have been kids that have thrived. There have been kids that have struggled, and they've had no option. And it's heartbreaking. And so I do think you're right that as we start, this is a more hopeful place to say, how can we level the playing field here? Because in a lot of ways, kids are all coming back leveled.
Right.
Emotionally, socially, like the playing field, obviously for privileged kids is different.
Right.
But they're all coming back to school in the same way. So how do we really make this about our kids?
Absolutely. I just the idea that we've all experienced sort of this trauma together collectively. Of course it's played out in different ways in different communities based on our demographics and our privilege, but that we all have this common understanding of a global pandemic, and that we're clawing through it together, and we have different risk factors, but we also have amazing protective factors that will, I think, help bring us hopefully together a little bit more, and to help us kind of launch into this next phase, whatever that may bring.
Yeah. And I think that we are hitting that point now. Well, I mean, I think we've been here for a while, but COVID is not the only crisis that these kids are experiencing. Their life is happening now, and there are other things happening and other traumas happening, and parents that have gotten diagnosed with cancer and all of these things. And our kids need us and you more than ever. And I think it's our job to kind of step up and say, okay, we got to figure this out.
Absolutely. And make sure that our school systems are funded with the appropriate personnel to help carry the burden of this pandemic as it plays out in school buildings. And parents, I think, have a huge voice in what that looks like, and partnering with those personnel that are, are the other adults that are interfacing with our kids, to strengthen and sort of fortify how our kids come out of this, and how we do this together in partnership is critically important.
Carrie, I cannot thank you enough for your time. I'm so glad that the kids at your school have you, and that you've shared your expertise with parents. We all have so much to learn about this as we are, like your word, clawing our way through this together. That's how it's felt.
Exactly.
That's how it's felt.
Well, thank you so much, Shannon. It's funny to think about us, 20 plus years ago now as Santa Clara grads, walking through the halls of Campese, now sitting here together talking.
I know it's been a long road. I mean, who'd have thunk, but I do want to leave on a note of hope though. I do feel hopeful. I am so thankful that every adult can get a vaccine. I hope that makes teachers feel safer going in and kids, but I appreciate so much the work that you do. And it is going to be a process of education for all of us to realize that we do have a voice and we can partner and help change these systems in a way that's productive after this nightmare.
Absolutely. Nightmare is right. Well, thank you, Shannon.
Good luck to everyone as this hellscape of a school year ends. I'm feeling so much relief that we're going to put this year behind us and move on. I can only guess what September will look like, but now I know at least I have an idea of what to look for if my kids start struggling. Carrie, thanks so much for your time and your service and for keeping your work child-centric. If you like this podcast, please share it with everyone you know. Rate it, review it, and follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter at In Front of My Face and on Instagram at Right in Front of My Face. And I'm always welcome to topic ideas and feedback at rightinfrontofmyface@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, take a minute to ask some extra questions to the people around you who you think you know, because you never know what's happening right in front of your face.